Awesome. We are live officially. We've already got some people that have been standing by waiting for us to come on. We're going to kind of give it a few minutes before we dive into things, so give us a chance to have a few more people pop on. This has been a kind of an impromptu talk that we're going to be doing today, but highly anticipated. It's been all over Instagram and Facebook. So I'm really excited to welcome our Instagram family, our Facebook families from across Canada and the United States that I know are tuning in this afternoon to talk about a really, really important issue around human trafficking. As you know, you should know, especially if you're following Freedom, that today is World Day Against Human Trafficking. And so I'm excited that we're going to go into a bit of a deep dive inside human trafficking. You know, we're using the hashtag today to expose the exploiters. And if you are, I'm going to put it up at the bottom there. If you are doing out any live posting, make sure to use those hashtags, save the children, help free them, expose the exploiters. And today is the day. Post away, share, repost. We really, really need to expose and shed a major light on the issue of human trafficking. And I would probably say that this is the first time in a really, really long time that we are seeing the topic of human trafficking being amplified to the point that it is. So we're really encouraged to see that. And joining me today, I'm really, really grateful. We have Timea Nagy and also Shane Erickson, which we're going to try to not confuse Shay and Shane on this call. As you can see, we put us on the opposite end, so that at least
we look a little bit different.
You know, we're separated by Timea in the middle, which was, I thought, was kind of cute. That both of us have very similar names, so we'll try not to get that confused today. So I'm going to maybe just introduce us a little bit. Timea, I'll start with you, my dear. For those of you who know me, you would know Timea for sure. She has been a dear friend of mine going on 10 years. And honored to have her with us today. Timea is a human trafficking survivor, an author and speaker and social advocate. She is the founder and CEO of a social enterprise corporation called Timea's Cause, and that's committed to affecting change and shaping the future by creating second chances for victims of modern day slavery around the globe, eradicating modern day slavery one sector at a time. We're going to dive into what that means in a little bit with Timea. I want to share with you a little bit of her background and her bio. We're going to hear a bit of her story later, but Timea immigrated to Canada in 1998. That's when her nightmare unfolded in Toronto in the same year after arriving from Budapest in Hungary in the hopes of finding meaningful employment. As a daughter of a Hungarian policewoman, Timea was held hostage for 3 terrifying months at the hands of traffickers and was forced to work in the sex industry here in Toronto. I should say, I'm coming to you live from Toronto, Ontario. Shane is in Montana. Timea, where are you dialing in from right now? Toronto too? Yeah.
I'm here. Sorry, something went wrong with my laptop. I went on mute, and now I hope I'm not on mute. Am I on mute?
No, we can hear you.
No, I can hear you.
Perfect.
Yeah, I can hear you. You're coming Toronto too, right? Toronto area?
I'm just outside of Toronto, yes.
So sorry, I'll keep going to just share a little bit about Timea. So after being rescued, Timea founded an organization 10 years later called Walk With Me, which is a nonprofit organization that assisted victims of human trafficking and law enforcement agencies all across Canada. And between 2009 and 2015, Walk With Me helped over 300 victims of human trafficking and over 500 human trafficking related cases that were all across Canada. Those of you that know her, she has got some of the most notable recognitions for her work to fight human trafficking, including the Queen Elizabeth Judy Medal, the Prime Minister of Canada, and also the Attorney General have recognized her as well, and that is just to name a few. If you've not picked up her book yet, I will do that plug for Timea because it's so well deserved. Her book, Out of the Shadows, was released last May, and it is a nation's bestseller book in less than a week's time. So you definitely want to pick it up. Timea, we're so grateful and thankful for you to give us your time today to join in with us.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you for getting through my whole long bio. I appreciate it.
No, it's okay. I actually had to skip through some of it as you requested. Shane, it's a pleasure to meet you. This is my first time meeting Shane on our live, who is from Deliver Fund, and that's a nonprofit organization, intelligence organization that's dedicated to combating human trafficking for decades, with decades of experience in their careers as CIA, NSA, special operations, and law enforcement. Deliver Fund leverages cutting-edge technology into ultimate weapons against fighting human trafficking. Also, Shane has such an interesting background as well. I'm going to share with you a little more about his bio and background. At a young age, Shane's best friend was unfortunately kidnapped, sexually assaulted, and killed by a repeat sex offender who had just been released from prison. Ever since then, Shane made a commitment to focus his passion in public service, and he comes to us today with 11 years of law enforcement experience, with 6 in the position as a senior detective. Following his years of public service with law enforcement, Shane took a position with the Deliver Fund as a senior targeting analyst, where he has been instrumental in partnering with law enforcement around the US, assisting with dismantling human trafficking networks through open source intelligence and training. I am so excited to learn more about what a senior targeting analysis is, Shane. Thank you for joining us. I can't wait to dive into that. I'm sure there's a few people out there watching going, what is that? I am one of them. So I cannot wait to learn more about what it is that specific position does. And I know that this video is going to be shared, and so I just thought I would share a little bit about Freedom for those of you guys who don't know. Freedom is a registered nonprofit organization that's dedicated to raising awareness and funds to fight human trafficking in Canada and abroad. We focus on all efforts around preventative measures to fight human trafficking, which would include awareness, advocacy, education, strengthening government policies and legislation on human trafficking. And since 2010, Freedom has become one of the most established and authoritative voices on the issue of human trafficking in Canada, and has helped to fund the rescue efforts of hundreds of victims nationwide. We are also a stakeholder to the federal government, the provincial government of Ontario, and Toronto's municipality, and we've helped to amend the criminal code 3 times in Canada, and we also sit on the federal National Action Plan. We are a volunteer organization as well, so we are full-time passion and dedication run over here to pick up the good fight of human trafficking that's needed. I'm not going to go into who I am. I'll just tell you that I'm a human rights activist, philanthropist, entrepreneur, speaker, and I'm a huge wellness advocate in all things chemical-free, toxic-free. Everything else is kind of weird for me to say, so you can read about it somewhere else. So, guys, welcome. You know, you guys both come with such incredible backgrounds and stories. Before we kind of go into the topic of human trafficking and kind of what is it and laying the stage for people, I would love for you both to just share a little more of your stories going into your bios. To me, I know people would love to hear your story, and Shane, more around the power of really what fueled you with your childhood experience. So Shane, why don't you start us off?
Sure. So thank you for having me. First and foremost, it's my pleasure to be here. So my story, really, like you touched on, really got started at a young age. I was 8 years old, and my best friend at the time, his name was Ryan Van Lucian. He was playing in his backyard when he was abducted by a repeat sex offender who had just gotten out of prison 2 weeks prior. So nobody had any monitor on this guy. Nobody was watching him. Nobody was doing anything. He abducted Brian from his backyard, He sexually assaulted him. He murdered him and then threw him in some bushes and left him. So from that point on, I mean, that really, I can look back at different phases in my life and different things that I have done, but that has always been my driving force. It's always been the factor on why I'm doing what I'm doing and why I'm so passionate about what I do.
Yeah, no kidding. And how old were you when that took place?
I was 8. Yeah, we were both 8.
You were 8. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Heart-wrenching. I mean, I can't even imagine, how do you even digest that as an 8-year-old, as a child?
Yeah, and right? I can even remember to this day, you know, being at his funeral and seeing his casket and having it go by in the church and you know, not really understanding why my best friend is in a casket and why we can't go play. Mm-hmm. So yes, it was a very hard thing to digest. But boy, has it fueled me.
No kidding. I mean, it's when you take something so evil and so negative and you're able to use part of that for good and a way to really honor him, right, and his memories. So unbelievable. Timea.
Hi, thank you very much, Shane, for sharing that. It's interesting because I've been working with you for almost 2 years now, and I actually never heard you sharing that story. I know that part of your story, but I never heard you sharing it. So thank you very much for doing that today online. And some of us got very used to speaking publicly about stuff, and some of us are not as used to speaking. And I know you're certainly not, you know, you're not a very public person about this stuff. So I know it wasn't easy, but I do appreciate it. And I think everybody else does. So, and I have worked with Shane on Frontline, and I see the dedication in his eyes on those operations. So it definitely shows that what's fueling you. So just like Shay said, sometimes you just turn that into something else to motivate you to keep on going. And I think that's what kind of happened to me too. And I don't know if it's the same way with you, Shane, but to me, it's like what happened to me. And by the time I realized what happened to me, and then I realized that I was a victim of a crime, I was angry for so long. So, you know, being taken advantage of at the age of 20 and luring me to a job that doesn't exist and take my food and won't let me sleep and make money on me, and all that you're doing with your eyes wide open and consciously doing this to another human being. To this day, I just don't understand how some people can just turn that off and do it. But we kind of have to figure it out and learn about that side soon, because, and that's what Deliver Fund is doing. We need to get into the mind of the human trafficker to understand them more, because once we actually understand them more, then we know how to kind of diffuse them and neutralize them and take them out. And, that's one of the reasons why I joined Deliver Fund and this an amazing award-winning team. But back to my story, you know, yeah, I was trafficked from Hungary to Canada at the age of 21. What was worse about it, it wasn't, I mean, the whole thing is sad. Even today, I actually have to write some part of my story again for another project, and it just never gets old. You know, I woke up today at 6 a.m. writing, you know, 3 pages on my story, and I still get worked up about it. Every day I get reminded of my life that was taken away from me and my future, my possible future that I had. So it's basically like human trafficking is killing you in a way. If they don't kill you physically, they kill you emotionally, and you die. And that person that you were up until you became trafficked, it dies. It doesn't exist anymore. Something changed. And, you know, I heard this many times. I was told that, you know, I'm the lucky one. I survived. Is it though? Yes, I'm very happy to be here, and don't get me wrong, but not only that I survived and I'm living with the ghost of the past, I'm also living with the survival guilt that why am I the one who survived and the others didn't? So So human trafficking is just beyond evil. It's so very hard to put it in words, right? So when I finally realized that I was a victim of human trafficking, that took 12 years. And when I realized that now there's a name for it and I was a victim and there's a laws against it, at first, I was relieved, but then I was really angry. I was just so angry because for 12 years I felt it was all my fault and I was hiding and I was ashamed and I was lying about myself to everybody around me. And I didn't go home and I just shut myself out from the world. I lost 12 years of life. I couldn't go to school. There's so many things I couldn't do. So think about when you were 20, between 20 and 30. Think about all the years that you had, all the amazing experiences hopefully you had. I didn't have any of them. It's not just me. It's survivors, sex trafficking survivors, forced labor survivors. The minute you take them and put them away into a different environment and traffic them, there's no way back. There's no way back to their old life, ever again. I don't care what you say or anybody says. So those years are gone. You'll never get them back. It's almost like being kidnapped or put to sleep for years, and then you wake up and your parents are older. You missed out on having a family, and everybody moved on, and you're still there in the past with your ghost. So there's so many ways to explain my story. There's so many ways to explain what it does to human being. The book does a really good job, but even in the book, there's so many things you just can't say, right? So yeah, human trafficking is evil, and I'm so glad that there are people like you guys and others who are here today to listen, talk about it, and wanting to be a part of this solution.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Shane, I'll share a little bit of my story since I don't think you know, and then for those that are tuning in that might not have heard my story before, my journey started back in 2003. I was 18. I moved to the island of Oahu in Hawaii to start my university education. And in Waikiki, our dorm was in one of the hotels, and half operated as the hotel and the other half operated as the dorm. And it was on Kuhio Avenue. And if you stay there long enough, it becomes known as Candy Lane. And by day, you see families and kids and people in board shorts and bathing suits with surfboards. And come nighttime, it quickly turns into half-naked young girls that are walking the strip or walking the track. And that's, as you guys know, anywhere that the girls are just walking. And being that I was 18, and seeing so many girls that were so much younger than me, 13, 14, 15 years old, I wanted to understand why would a girl choose to do this? And over a period of time, which is a much longer story, I started to learn their stories. And I learned about the modeling agencies that didn't exist when they showed up on the island of Oahu. I learned about the boyfriends that promised them a vacation of a lifetime, and it turned into their worst living nightmare. To the forced abortions, the forced augmentations, parents picking their kids up from school. And so what I started to learn is that the word prostitute that we equate so much with choice is widely misrepresented, and the more accurate term to be using is prostituted. And it was in that time period that nobody really knew the word human trafficking. I mean, even in the US, we're going 2003 to kind of 2006, it was being talked about, but on a very, very buried level, right? Like it was not, the trafficking in persons report was like, well, what is that? People, it was not being spoken about. So the word human trafficking, I really didn't start to understand that till I had actually left the island. But looking back on it, I just knew that I wanted to help. While I was living in Hawaii, I made a vow to myself to say that if it was me, I'd be praying that somebody would be coming for my rescue. I'd be praying that somebody would be speaking up on my behalf. And I've said this many times, I really do not believe in the term to be a voice for the voiceless. I believe that every girl, every child, every boy has a voice that's being silenced. And I wanted to amplify that voice for them. I wanted to tell their stories. I wanted to tell the world that these are victims and that they're not whores, they're not sluts, they're not survival of the fittest, which I think is a really lousy, lame excuse that society and our governments have done and failed our children when we say, well, have you tried everything? And as if that is even an option. But knowing that these guys, these were victims, that they were not there by choice. And for me, that's where my journey started. And I had no idea what it was going to amount to. In 2010, that's when I founded Freedom. So I was on this 7-year journey. I moved to Vancouver, I moved to Australia. And I say that the topic or the issue of human trafficking kept following me. But as you both know, once your eyes are open and you know the signs, you just see the world completely different. And so that it wasn't that it was following me, it was there, and I was now just recognizing it. So that's a little bit of my background. It's part of my why, you know, and what fuels me. And so, like I said, I think I said this before. I don't know if I said this when we started the live, but what I really wanted for you guys today was in joining Timea and Shane and myself is almost like a fireside chat. Obviously, the three of us are very versed in the issue of human trafficking. And so I wanted to kind of go a little deeper on the issue and kind of invite you guys into some conversations that maybe we would be having behind closed doors of, you know, what needs to happen in the movement now, and those type of questions. So as we kind of move into that, and we'll lay the foundation, what I'd love to know is, and I'm dying to know, Shane, you've got to explain your position of, you know, what it is that you do. And you have all of these crazy trainings as well in your bio, which I thought I would save that so you could properly explain that and me not butcher it. So tell us what it is that you guys do, or that you do.
Sure. So I'm referred to as a senior targeting analyst. So what we do is we work one-on-one with law enforcement. So what I'll do is we will, whether we're running a virtual operation with law enforcement or we're actually boots on the ground with them, leading up to that operation, I will actually get online and I will find ads that I believe girls are being trafficked in. And I will go through those ads, and then I will find who that trafficker is, and I will find everything about that trafficker that can be found, along with identifying other victims and potential other traffickers. And I put that in an intelligence report, and then I give that intelligence report to law enforcement. So when they come out of the gate, they're running right out of the gate. It's not a lag time of them having to try to develop targets. We provide that intel for them so they can come right out of the gate and put handcuffs on. So
wow. That's incredible. So you're like pulling things from like what, social media? You're trying to find emails? Like what type of information?
Everything. So anything open source. One of the misconceptions with Deliver Fund and maybe some other organizations are that we're hacking into stuff. We don't do. Everything that we do is all open source intelligence. So yes, I'm getting into what they put on social media, email, you know, anything that is open source about that individual, I'm capturing and putting that into an intelligence report for law enforcement.
And if I may,
and I'm just going to dive it down. Yeah, go ahead.
So Deliver Fund's focus is, you know, targeting the trafficker, but they are also incredibly great to create an intel package on the victims. Yes. So when we go out together, live operations, I would be in a hotel room or I would be in a vehicle with them and with law enforcement. And so when they have the target package, because of Shane and his team, I already know more about the victim than as if she just showed up at the door, right? So if the victim walks in for a potential time with her client, and we are in a hotel during the operation and we are hoping to have a conversation with the victim, I don't go in blindsided, not knowing who the victim is, her background, how long she's possibly been trafficked, which those informations are so very important for me to know, because then I know what mindset she's at, and then I know what kind of a conversation I need to have with her. If I don't have Shane and the other analytic team, I would just go in and trying to guess, and your guess is as good as mine. And usually the outcome is not nearly as effective as when we have those information.
So we like to,
That's incredible.
we provide law enforcement actionable, verifiable intelligence that they can act on immediately. So coming from, the law enforcement background, when I'm doing an interview with somebody, whether it be from, a sex crime to a homicide, I want as much information, or at least that law enforcement officer should want as much information about that subject that they are going to talk to, so they can exploit those things in their conversation. Same thing, same premise here. We're providing law enforcement with as much actionable and verifiable intelligence as we can. So when these people come to the door, like Timea said, we know what that potential pimp is going to be driving. I already have his vehicle identified. I have the license plate identified. So when that pulls into the parking lot of the motel or house or wherever they're at, law enforcement can track that vehicle coming and know where that vehicle is at. And I mean, it just provides more safety and, just a better outcome all the way around.
The other thing that is really helpful is when they have information from the social media, and I'm sitting with the victim, and I find out in my earpiece from their team is that the victim has a 2 years old waiting for her at a motel, right? Yeah. So it's a good information for me to know, because that's something that I can talk to the victim about, and we can bond on that. Or it's good information for me to know from Shane and his team that she actually does have a trafficker and he's the one who dropped her off. So that when I actually talk to the victim and she says she's completely independent, then I can start talking about her boyfriend as if I'm very familiar with who is she with, so that we can get all those things out of the way, so we can actually have a real heart-to-heart emotional conversation.
Yeah.
And I don't know how many times, Timea, that you and I have been doing operations, and we'll actually have the pimp show up with the girl, and he will hold her child in the car. And so after we make, the date's been set, we get her up to law enforcement, and they do the stop on that potential trafficker. They find that child, that 2-year-old child or that younger child, right there in the car at the time.
Yeah.
So that's all the information that we can provide to law enforcement, not only to identify the trafficker, but then to identify potentially who else could be in that vehicle when they go up and make contact.
Right. And I have two questions, one for Shane, one for Timea. So when you say open source, I just want to be really clear for people who are not in law enforcement or come from this world of intelligence. I understand that open source means that you are not going into like classified, needing like high level clearance stuff. Like this is stuff that you can research where, or like, what does open, I shouldn't be the one to start explaining it. Tell us like what open source.
Yeah, in a nutshell, I mean, this is the stuff that individual has put out, whether they put it out via social media, whether it be, this is stuff that they have put out themselves. And that's why at Deliver Fund, we have 100% conviction rate as of today, because that open source intelligence that we find, right, on that trafficker, this is all stuff that they have put out. So whether it's stories on Instagram, where they're showing them counting money, or Facebook, when they're showing them with their girls, when you combine that for years and years and years and can show a pattern with multiple different victims, and then you present that to the prosecuting attorney can then present that to, the defense counsel. There's no fruit to the poisonous tree, right? And search warrant stuff, because this is all stuff that their client has put out that we have gathered. So it's anything basically that they are putting out in social media form, email addresses, those type of things that we can go out and openly gather. We're not doing subpoenas, we're not doing search warrants, we're not hacking into anything. This is all the stuff that they put out. So it's very powerful, very powerful.
Yeah. Thank you for clarifying that. If I'm thinking it, a whole bunch of other people will be thinking it. So I just wanted to ask. And Timea, I was going to get into this a little bit later, but you already touched on it slightly in terms of what Deliver Fund is doing by packaging this information so that you're equipped going into these situations to understand the mindset of the victim that you could be coming into contact with on the other end. And, you know, it's a question that you and I get all the time, Shane, I'm sure you do as well, is, you know, why doesn't the girl just leave? Why does she not just leave? And mindset plays a big part of that, along with the control. But there isn't a better person to speak to that than yourself on the different stages of mindset. You know, like you alluded to, you know, understanding the mindset of that victim when you're going in on the other side, and with the work that Deliver Fund is doing is so powerful for you to already have that insight. Can you elaborate a bit on that?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, Shay. So as you already know, 95% of the reason why victims don't leave is because of mindset. But what does that mean? It's the shame and guilt of leaving the family, leaving the situation behind when you knew deep inside that this may have not been the best choice of your life, right? When your instinct was telling you also that there might be some, you know, it might be questionable. However, you're so desperate in the time when you get approached by the trafficker, you're so vulnerable for whatever reason. You have such a tunnel vision that you just want to leave whatever you're in right now. In your heart, you just want to believe that wherever you're going, it has to be better what you're trying to run away from. And so in my case, I needed money, but I also had some other very serious issues in my home life, right? So I saw Canada as an escape. And I also saw Canada as it's going to fix our financial problems, right? But by the time I got here, I realized that this is nothing what I thought it was. But by then, I was already made to do a lot of things that I would have never done in my life. By then, I was a different person. So there was no going back, because in this environment that I'm in, at least I have girls around me who understand what I'm going through, and they're not going to judge me for what I'm doing. Never mind the traffickers, never mind the abuse and the threat that if you leave, you know, your family is going to die. It's true. Very scary stuff they tell you every day. But I think what's also is really, really holding you back is to go back to what? To who? To how? With the way you are, it's actually in many ways it's not very different than the veterans that come home from the war. You're a different person. You can't put back into what you left. You can't just go back to school. You can't just pick it up where you left it from. You've seen too much. Too much happened to you. So therefore, this is your new life, whether you want it or not. To a level of extent, it's actually easier. And I know a lot of people don't want to believe it or hear this, but it's easier for me to stay here where everybody already does what I do. Yes, I have to pay some money, whatever, but my family is not going to be hurt. So on. It's easier to stay here, even though, but it comes in waves, right? There is the I can't believe this is happening to me, and there is the stage where I'm going to accept that this is my fate. But it comes to a point, because we're human beings, that there's only so much you can take. But it's different for everybody, right? So if I walk in, I have about less than 30 seconds to figure it out where she's at. And the only way to know that, if I know how long she's been in it, I need to know the timeline, right? If I don't have the timeline, it's going to take me a lot longer to figure out where she's at. Because when I know how long she's been there, then I understand the stages, and I could guess what stage she's at. And sometimes there is a stage where there is absolutely no way in hell that she's going to listen to me. I know where she's at. So there's no point. There's always a point. But then when I know that there's absolutely not a chance she can hear me right now, then I act differently, right? I just go into the planting the seed mode. But if there is a chance that they are at the first two stages, first is like, oh my gosh, I'm so scared, I can't believe I'm here, or I'm just going to accept my fate, but I wish I could get out of here. If I find them in that stage, there is a chance, and that's when Shane knows this. That's when we don't leave the scene. I will stay for hours and hours and hours. In one scene, I was in for 9 hours, and I would not let her go, because I knew that all she needs is just more help and emotional support. And Shane and the team, I don't know if you were there, Shane, for this one, but they were outside for 9 hours. And finally she came forward and she said, "You're right, I don't want to be here." She had a child who was actually abducted the night we rescued her. So that's what I mean by mindset.
Can I ask you, for people like listening, when they hear you say that you stayed there for 9 hours, like, what does that mean? Are you with her? Are you in the room? Are you outside? Like,
so
share with people.
Okay, I can't share a picture, but it means is that I go into the scene, whether it's a motel or a hotel or the out call place. It could be an apartment. In this specific case, we started in a massage parlor. That was an apartment outside. It was in Texas. And I knew in my heart that she was the one out of 6 girls who had the most vulnerable situation. So I focused in on her. I knew I'm not going to get anything from the other girls. I knew she was the most vulnerable at the most vulnerable stage. And I knew that she needed help. I could see it on her face. I didn't know what she was hiding or what was so, but anyways, so when we started the conversation, all the other girls were taken off the scene and taken to different areas. But we were just keep on going with her. And so we were staying in that location, I think, until 3 a.m. And I walked in on that scene with the police at, I want to say 6 p.m. It was still light outside. We left that location at 3 a.m. when she said she still wasn't fully cooperative, meaning she still didn't fully admit that she needed help, but she allowed us to take her home. So then we went home, and that's when we found out that her son was kidnapped. And then I stayed with her in the apartment. We didn't have any grounds to take her or rescue her or anything. It was just about having a conversation and talk to her. And so we stayed over there for another 2 hours in her apartment, which is when she finally came forward. She didn't want me to leave. She didn't want me to leave, but she didn't want to talk to me. She just listened. She just kept asking me to keep talking to her. So I kept telling her about my story, how I felt. So, and 9 hours later, she finally said, "You're right. You are right about everything. They hold my son against me, and that's why I'm here. And I did not come here to prostitute myself. I didn't know anything about it." And so that's what it means. So sometimes it's in a hotel room, sometimes it's in their house, sometimes it's in jail when it's in the States. They have different laws. So sometimes on an operation, they arrest the girls. Unfortunately, I know that's not how we do it here. But then the girl is removed, the victim is removed from the scene, is sent to a processing room. And then if she doesn't want to say anything or she doesn't cry out for help, she goes to jail. So I wait about 6-7 hours until she's processed, and then she's in jail. And then Deliver Fund and law enforcement escorts me into jail. And then I spend hours and hours and hours with them in jail. And it's just about providing emotional support, let them know that they are not alone, and let them know that it's still not too late to ask for help.
And this girl in particular, this was in the United States, or was this in Canada?
It was in the United States. But when you read my bio and we talked about over 300 victims, that's very similar stories.
Yeah, I think enough. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
With what Timea was talking about, because I mean, we have all seen it firsthand when we bring these girls and they make these dates in law enforcement. To have a person that can relate to them one-on-one with what they're going through, what they have been going through, what they've seen. It's something that it's another tool that every law enforcement agency in the country and in Canada should have. Absolutely. Because they can share those same situations, those same scenarios that Timea was involved in, that this girl has been involved in, and they relate in a way that personally I can't, and most law enforcement can't as well.
But again, without the work that you guys do, I would never be able to do the work that I do. So it's just an incredible partnership all around.
Yep, very much so.
Yeah, and it's why we need deliverfund.ca. We need a Canadian version for you guys to come here, right?
Well,
it's so you know, for those that maybe don't know, in both Canada and the United States, the average age of entry into forced prostitution is about 13, 14 years old. And depending on what state you're in, that number is going to go up or go down. Shane, with the experience that you guys do with Deliver Fund, what are you guys finding? What's the age bracket that you guys tend to be working with?
Like you had said, I heard you talk about this before. With the average age group that an individual, a victim, gets into human trafficking is 12 to 14 years old in the United States. Well, think about that. So if the average is 12 to 14, imagine how many 9, 10, 11-year-old girls, boys, our children, have to fill that gap to get that number down so low. And I think that is lost on a lot of people, is just, our vulnerable youth is who they're targeting here. They're easy to exploit. They're easy to go after. They're always on social media. They're a lot of these girls that are victims of human trafficking. They're looking for something. They don't have parents at home. They don't have that relationship, and so that's when that trafficker comes in and acts in that relationship. So I think that just the number, it's crazy. 12 to 14 years old is the average age that a victim gets into human trafficking, and I think that that's just crazy. It speaks for itself.
Yeah. And then, when you start talking about mindset and that journey, right? Like for us, at least in Ontario, the average age of rescue is usually around 17 years old. And so when you look at that average versus the rescue, you're a good 3, 4, maybe 5 years that you have been being sexually exploited and sold every day. I say about 15, 20 times a day, and that the body is being rented out and raped over and over again, right? And what that does to you times 365, times 5 or times 4, or just even 3 months, 1 day is too long, period, full stop, right? And the amount of trauma that then is set out, and, Shane, I'm not going to speak for you, but I know you'll agree with me. Timea is arguably one of the strongest individuals that I know. Truly is one of my heroes who has overcome so much. And you talk about resilience, and you talk about the power of the word healing, and having the ambition to keep going and to build yourself back up. But there's not a lot of people, not a lot of girls that have the same quote unquote ending. And Timea's still got so much of her story. She's like just getting started in her journey. But, just even in her shorter healing period, to think of all of the accomplishments that Timea has been able to achieve, that's not the ending for majority of these girls, right? That they go into cycles of either falling back in, whether it's into addiction, being rescued, and going back to their trafficker, because as Timea said, it's like you don't know anything else. Where do you go? And even though you've been offered shelter and food elsewhere, it's then this mindset and the trauma bond forms between your trafficker and the victim. And when it's the longer that you're in it, the harder it's going to be able to actually break out and restore the mind, body, and the soul emotionally.
Yeah, and like I'd like to add to that, Jay, too, is each one of these girls has really a different story, right? About their background, or whatever their background may be, and then how they got into the life, whatever that may be. And then a lot of these girls, that you raised the question earlier, why don't they just leave? Well, think about this when you are a 12-year-old, 13, 14-year-old girl who was out there looking for something, and here comes one of these guys that promises you the world, and gives you all these things. And then before you know it, what they like to call seasoning, and Timea can speak on this as well, they're now holding them hostage in a motel room, a house, raping them however many times a day, not feeding them, sleep deprived, pumping them full of narcotics. And this goes on for who knows how long before then they feel comfortable that they can put them out to see other Johns. So, I mean, the trauma bond that develops with that individual and her trafficker is tremendous.
Yeah. I mean, you think we all know somebody who has been a victim of rape, and that one time is a journey that sets them up for the rest of their life around healing and trauma and triggers, right? Timea can speak to that as well. All kinds of different triggers that's going to happen, and not necessarily even around specific abuse at the time, like smells. Timea, we'll talk about that too. Like having the smell of the hotel room can be a trigger, right? And then that sets that victim back, reliving things and circumstances all over again. And so when you think of, one time, and yet the damage that is done for the rest of your life. And then again, going into 15, 20 times a day, times 365, times 3, times 4, whatever it is. Shane, Timea, Shane mentioned the seasoning. Do you want to maybe explain for people what that means?
Yeah, sure. So I think what he was referring to, tell me, Shane, if that's what you were referring to, the breaking the spirit part. Yeah. Where once the traffickers have the girls, they go through all kinds of techniques and tactics to break her spirit. So when Shane said, so that he's comfortable putting her out there, meaning that the invisible chain has been established, and now she is so programmed that even if he leaves her on one side of the town to go and drop off these girls on the other side, she will be waiting for him and she will not leave. We had a case in Durham region where she was in a motel and the trafficker was in Niagara Falls. And for those of you who's not from here, that's a good, what would you say, Shay, 2 hours drive from our spot? Yeah, that's right. So about 2 hours drive. And the trafficker have not came to see her for 12 hours. But when we looked at her phone was, the text messages were like this, and the detectives at the time didn't understand. So it was, can I go to the bathroom? Can I light a smoke? Can I go to the bathroom again? Can I go to the vending machine on the hallway? She had to ask for permission for everything because she was sold in the idea that he's watching her. Even though he's not there, he knows every move she's making. And I know that feeling very well. I believed that for 2.5 months. I actually thought that they had eye everywhere. So that's what they do. They create like a bond. But there's a new breed of traffickers, and we need to talk about that. Trafficking is evolving. Yeah. Here's the old-fashioned traffickers, which is the guerrilla guys, the guys that do all the things that we talked about. And in the States, it's still very, very prevalent. In Canada, and even in part of the States, there's a new breed of trafficking happening, which is it's no longer the old-fashioned pimpist trafficking. Now it's a group of guys and girls, and they create a crew together, and they ride it together. And these are the girls who got into the game 5-6 years ago when they were 13, 14, 17. No one came to the rescue. There was no resources. So there's this regular girls and boys and crews that are in the game. It's still, human trafficking, but now those crews are actually hiring the newbies, right? And there's a whole new movement, and it's thanks to the pop culture, where the pimps don't have to do the whole looting techniques anymore, or not as much as they used to, because our next generation is so used to the new pop culture, which is nothing but, not all of it, but there are a lot of music is coming straight from whatever studios they're coming from, but it's all about the pimping and the game. Out open, the lyrics, if I were to show you, these are the things we teach in parents on our classes. So by the time a pimp hits up a girl on Instagram, she already speaks the language of the game. There's a whole different language, right? She already understands the mindset, not to the full extent. She has already sold on the game lifestyle. And trust me, when I say she sold, she knows 100% that she's gonna be a hoe. That's the thing. It's cool to be a hoe now. The new language and this new wave and this new whatever is coming up. It's cool to be a hoe. It's cool to be a bad bitch. These are the languages that are used, and it's cool to be an escort, cool to be a stripper. So there's that new breed of wave of traffic victims are coming that they don't understand, not for at least 6 months, because they were sold on this very lifestyle, but they were only told, I say 70% of the truth. But there's still that 30% that hurts. That hurts physically. It's rape, it's violent, and you still broken. You stay broken. So what they sell you on is not exactly what it is, but try to take those cases to court. You can't. There's no way. There's no way to take those cases to court, but it's still human trafficking.
And for those that are tuning in that maybe are learning this for the first time, Timea, why can't they take them to court? What makes them dismissible?
Because the girls were willingly going into, the girls willingly got a bus ticket for themselves. They got themselves to the hotel. They started posting their own pictures. They started paying for their own ads. There's no exploitation to this life up until this point. Exploitation will start later, and yes, you can prove that part in court, but no jury or no judge will actually rule in your favor in prosecution, because they already have hard time with getting these cases to court, even with the victims that did not sign up for the game lifestyle. Imagine how hard it would be to prove that it ended up being. So the mindset is, well, you asked for it. This is what you wanted. You understood that you're gonna be an escort. Next time, just choose your boyfriends better. That's usually, that would be the outcome of those court cases.
Right. So I want to just throw in. Sorry, go ahead, Shane.
Sorry about that. I think, and I think that's why it's very important and paramount, because Timea just nailed it, that's why law enforcement needs to be educated, right? Because yes, you may not be able to get a human trafficking charge on that individual, but we may be able to get some other white collar crimes, or we may be able to charge them with, distribution of drugs or weapons, because they all converge. 90% of the time, if they're running girls, they're running drugs, they're running weapons, they're involved in some other, white collar crime. So just because you can't specifically get a human trafficking charge doesn't mean that you can't put those individuals away and rescue those girls out. And that's the evolution, if you will, that Deliver Fund takes. Is obviously we provide the intel and everything. So we feel that without traffickers, there will not be trafficking. But we also understand, and we're realists in the world, as the case that Timea just laid out, there's got to be other ways that we have to go around doing this. So, that's where we're willing to educate and work with law enforcement. Hey, if that is the scenario and we can't get them on a human trafficking charge, let's sidestep that. Let's look at some of these other crimes that we can get them on, and we can charge them with those crimes, which in a lot of jurisdictions hold just as heavy as a penalty as a human trafficking charge. And you can get the girls out and rescue them that way.
So I want to ask you, I want to just throw out a few stats really quick, and I want to come back to this trafficker conversation. But when I look at human trafficking in 2010, when I founded Free Them, to where we are now, and looking at the difference going from 27 million people in slavery today to over 40 million people currently in slavery today. And that can be any form of slavery, right? Sexual exploitation, forced labor, organ trafficking, debt bondage, chattel bondage, which in Canada and the United States, as we know, the two most prevalent forms is sexual exploitation and forced labor. When I think of where the dollar amount was years ago, where it used to be a $32 billion industry, and now it's globally 150 billion, with 38 billion coming right out of the United States alone. The increase that's happened amongst organized crime, amongst gangs, street levels, elitist groups. When we talk about the traffickers right now, even Timea, coming back to you segued perfectly into it. I wanted to kind of lay some of these stats for our audience as to like who is the traffickers that you're seeing today, and at what level. Like when we're talking about some of these girls, what level is the operation happening at? Is it at the gang level? Is it higher than that, more organized crime? Shane, if you want to speak to that with what Deliver Fund is seeing.
Sure. Did you want to go first, Timea, or you want me to go?
Yeah, I would like to just add something that's not domestic sex trafficking, and I would like you to kind of finish it up with sex trafficking. So it's also very important when we're talking about human trafficking, we include forced labor, right? So a lot of those stats actually are forced labor related as well. So when you ask me what kind of traffickers we see, I'm going to let Shane answer that from the domestic sex trafficking perspective. But when we're talking about Canada and North America, about from trafficking foreign nationals, you know, that could also be companies, corporations, temporarily foreign national working agencies who bring people here, and then they pretend to be a staffing company, and they're the one who get paid, but the workers never get paid. But Sobeys would never know that the people who's fixing the shelves at the back at night are actually trafficked. So it is so incredibly relevant. So traffickers can be literally anyone and anywhere, depending on what kind of trafficking you are asking. So if it's the forced labor, it could be organized crime, it could be families, and it could be just individuals. And there's just a lot of money, even in forced labor. And I'm going to hand it over to you, Shane, to talk about the domestic side of it.
Okay. So you nailed it when you said the U.S. market for human trafficking and trafficking in general drives the market throughout the world with that amount of money. And what the biggest misconception is that we see within the United States is people feel that it is foreigners coming in that are being trafficked within the United States. 90 to 95% of the individuals, the victims of human trafficking that you are going to see within the United States are American citizens being trafficked by other American citizens. So it's our own people trafficking our sons, daughters, nieces, nephews, and we're seeing it from every level you can imagine. All the ones that you have just named, we have worked every one of those cases. So there is not one size fits all that I can say this is what we're looking for, or this is what we're looking for. When we get a case and we get a lead, we go after that, and it could meld into a street crimes or street gang. It could be an organized crime. It could be a husband trafficking his wife, which we have seen numerous times. A boyfriend trafficking his girlfriend numerous times. So, you know, to really put a face on it is very difficult. I would just say that we have worked in every aspect, every kind, every one that you just mentioned. We have worked one of those cases, multiple ones of those cases.
Yeah, and I think the point really is, and you know, I've said this numerous times, is that there is nothing that is too far-fetched when it comes to the issue of human trafficking. It is super unfortunate, but if you can think it, it's happening, right? When you think of who that trafficker is or who even the purchaser is, right? This is not a stereotypical spooky, creepy guy in an alleyway that is going and purchasing, you know, a 13-year-old for sex. Does that happen? Absolutely. But it is also your doctors and politicians and teachers and, you know, the single person at home and the father and the grandfather and, you know, all of these neighborhood people that we would least expect it. And that's why I just say, like, nothing is too far-fetched. And similar to the United States, in Canada, over 87% of all victims that are rescued in Canada are also Canadian. And so to your point, do we have international victims coming in? Absolutely. Timea's was one of them, right? You know, that definitely happens in our country. Canada, we see it a bit more because we are more friendly with our borders than our neighbors to the south of us. But a lot of the victims, international victims that even come in through Canada, end up in the United States, that get smuggled across our borders to end in the US. Again, because of your population, you have more people, so you could possibly make more money, right? It's economics at that point. And so, but you're absolutely right. We see, like I said, over 87% are Canadian. So this issue is a problem that is homegrown, where our girls, our young people are being trafficked from Montreal down the 401 to Toronto, stopping in Ottawa, coming from out east, moving to Vancouver, going to LA, stopping in Las Vegas, going through Minnesota, going to New York, going down to Florida, right? It's across the grid. And that's really what people don't realize as to when you think of human trafficking. It's not just happening in second and third world countries. It's a huge problem that is birthed right here on both of our countries' soil.
Yeah, I think that is the biggest misconception that I have found when talking to people about human trafficking, because it in a sense, it's a lot like, not a lot like, but domestic violence. If you're not involved or in a household with domestic violence, then basically it's out of sight, out of mind, right? So when they hear about human trafficking, they're relying on what they've seen from the movies, what's been put out there, and not realizing that, hey, this is happening in my neighborhood, in my city, and within my community. And it happens within every city, every community throughout the United States. I don't care how big it is, how small it is. If there's people there, there's human trafficking going on in some form, whether they're migratory and moving through, or they're there all the time. But it affects every community throughout the United States.
And I would just say that throughout my last 12 years of frontline career, just want to name you some professions where these people came from. Traffickers. I had teachers, real estate agents, social workers who were traffickers. We found an 84 years old man trafficking underage girls in San Francisco Bay. Actually a bank institution found that. I had a beauty queen, a former beauty queen, who was trafficking young women into the beauty industry. And of course it wasn't that. So the range of who could be a trafficker is absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and you know what? I just want to point out too, one of our audience right now, Sabrina, who's tuning in with us, actually made a really good point, saying that it's hard enough for people to acknowledge and admit what's happening in their own homes when you're talking about domestic abuse and violence, right? That never mind to acknowledge what's going on in your neighbors or across the street or in your own city. And so it can be very difficult for people to comprehend or conceive that this is going on, in our own neighborhoods.
I think
you guys and I, sorry?
I think a lot of people too, to an extent, rationalize behavior that they're seeing, right? So they will see something that they look at it and they say, this doesn't make sense. What I'm seeing with this guy and this girl and how he's treating her, how she's acting, all these indicators that I'm seeing, and then they rationalize it. Well, it's not my issue, or they're probably okay. Instead of, picking up and calling somebody, calling law enforcement and saying, hey, I would like you guys to check this out. And there's nothing wrong with that. And that's what I would encourage, all of our listeners and everybody to do. If you see something out there, call law enforcement and report it.
And I would just say one thing. I agree with you, Shane. And Shay, this, we had this conversation a million times. It's so much easier for us to go in denial, because if we have to accept the truth, it's so much harder to live with the truth, which is the fact that humans can be so cruel sometimes, and we've seen enough, and we just don't want to acknowledge it because it's easier. So there's no blame on people who want to turn a blind eye. It just means that you're compassion fatigue and you can't take it anymore. However, just like Shane said, If the only thing you do is you just call police and say something is wrong, good enough. You don't need to dive in, you don't need to become an advocate, you don't need to do anything. But if you see something, just say something. And that's how we're going to end this, to come together and become a part of the solution, right?
Yeah. Well, you kind of nailed what I wanted to go into next, Timea. So we're past the hour mark. I want to be mindful of both of your guys' time and even our audience. And I think everyone could see we could just keep the fire chat going. We can move from coffee, pour a glass of wine, and just keep the conversation going. Yeah, of course, it's happy hour. It really is. Although right now for us, this is impact hour, is what I like to say. Talking about what needs to be exposed. And the issue is so massive, therefore it becomes really complex. And we could just keep going, and maybe we'll do a part 2 to this conversation. But what I would love to ask both of you before we wrap up is, both of our countries have come a long way when you look at what was happening or not happening 10 years ago. I still think Canada is very much behind. That's a little bit of a different conversation. But when you think of what needs to happen right now, and it could be in law enforcement, it could be public awareness, just in general, when you think of the issue of human trafficking, I would like to get both of your guys' thoughts on what you would like to see happen right now in the movement.
Go ahead, Shane.
Yes. So speaking specifically to the United States, is we're having a huge push throughout the country to defund police. And I think and some people's hearts are in the right place for why they're wanting that done. But what they don't understand is, when you defund the police, you're defunding special programs like your human trafficking investigator, your ICAC investigator, your drug task force. Those are the programs that are going to be cut. And these are the guys that go out there every day and are saving our children from these individuals and putting handcuffs on these traffickers. These are the heroes in the game. Law enforcement is the heroes in the game. They're the ones that are putting their lives on the line to go out there and put handcuffs on these guys and gals. So for me, the biggest thing is when you're on this topic is be educated. Be educated about, if you're on the defund the police movement, be educated about whether, if you're cutting $150 billion from NYPD, where are those budget cuts going to take place? They're going to take place in your special units, and the human trafficking unit is a special unit. So they're going to be defunded and cut. So, for instance, in Montana, there was 244 cyber tips posted in 2019. In 6 months, there's been 412 in 2020. So we've already doubled that number, and that comes from the Attorney General and Department of Justice of Montana. In 6 months, we've doubled the number of reports of child trafficking and child exploitation in Montana. So it's not slowing down. They're cutting funding, and this problem is only growing and getting worse. So, as a former law enforcement officer, I'm a little biased, I guess, if you will, towards that. But I think, that's where a lot of this needs to be. We don't need to defund the police. We need to refund the police. We need to up their budget and get these guys the training and the expertise that they need to go out and do their job.
It's hard to follow what you're saying, Shane, because I agree with you too. I'm on the same page with you right there. We can do so much. We can raise awareness. We can do so many things. But if at the end of the day, the guys who are acting these horrible crimes don't go to jail, what's the point? Yeah. So, and if that's the route we are going, it looks that way, then maybe we need to focus on the next generation that's still untouched, and trying to focus on them and trying to create prevention enough so that they don't fall for it. But then you're up against social media versus parents, and who's going to win. So So I'm not saying we are completely hopeless. I'm just saying that you're right. If we are going backwards and defunding the police, which all the noise started in Canada too, because you know, Shane, America sneezed and then, or America coughs and then Canada has to sneeze.
Yes.
So that's just how it works. It trickles down here too. And it's already happening here too. And you're right. The first unit's going to go is human trafficking units and all the other stuff. So it's not looking good right now, to be honest.
And we just need people, you know, we need the silent majority, I like to say, to step up and say, you know, enough is enough. We know that there are bad apples within law enforcement, like there is within any profession, and we need to get rid of those guys. But 99% of law enforcement officers leave their family to protect you and I every day and ask nothing for it. They ask nothing for it. And these are the guys that we need to not only give them more money, so they are recruiting the best officers, they're getting paid better, and they have better training to do a better job. If you defund these officers, you are actually doing the exact opposite of what you want to do, because now they're not going to be able to pay individuals what basically anything. So who's going to take that job? It's going to be the individuals that you didn't want in there in the first place are going to be the ones they hire just to fill that position. So, you know, their movement is actually counterintuitive to what their purpose is.
You know, and I think it's really easy for people to put up a hashtag and say defund the police and to jump on a bandwagon with all kinds of stuff that mainstream media is covering. Interesting though how today it's World Day Against Human Trafficking, and I'd just like to point out, where's the mainstream media on that? Have you guys seen them covering this today?
Nope.
You know, it begs the question of who's controlling what. And it's easy to fall along with what is going on in the media and not actually asking the harder questions of what are the repercussions if we were to defund the police. Why can't we ask better questions to say, to your point, Shane, removing those that don't even warrant to be in service, whether they're crooked, whether they're bad cops, whether they're racist, whatever it is, remove those cops from law enforcement because they are giving them a bad name. And if you were to actually allocate a better salary to law enforcement across the board, you would also attract a much more, you would end up getting fantastic people because the criteria to also get in is also higher. And
Absolutely.
So for me, you know, if we actually valued and honored policing, when you really think about what you're asking, like law enforcement to do as a profession, okay, whether you want to defund the police or not, like stop that for a moment. Just look at what you're asking somebody to step into law enforcement. It's in a position of service. You are asking that person to literally be willing to give their life every day when they're on duty. And salaries for that should start a lot higher. The criteria should start a lot higher to have those type of personnel serve within the country. You know, and as you said, you know, there's bad apples and bad people in all different types of professions. For me, it's looking at what happens if that were to happen and the repercussions. And I look at it from the human trafficking standpoint of going, who's going for those children? Who's rescuing those? Who's rescuing those kids? Who is going after those that are being raped 15, 20 times a day, that are 13, 10, 11, 8, 14? You know, so I agree with you both. One of the things that I really know that we're still lacking, and in Canada, it has been an upward hill battle for going on 10 years, is to have the Ministry of Education actually teaching on human trafficking in our curriculum at a child appropriate way, in a child appropriate level, but educating on what is human trafficking, where does it happen, how could you get lured, how could you get recruited, the signs to look for. If you have a smartphone and you have access to Snapchat, Facebook, Instagram, what to look for, what to do, not to do, like all of these things need to be taught in school. No different than your ABCs, no different than learning 3-letter words to 5-letter words to whatever letter words, you know, like there's a progression of learning that takes place that by the time you graduate 8th grade, by the time, you know, you go off to university, you're equipped. You know language, you know math, right? You know economy, you learn, and knowledge is powerful. And right now, it has been the most frustrating thing in Canada, specifically, I'll speak to the province of Ontario, where it's just like no politician wants to be the one to actually really put it in curriculum. We finally now have this few little sentences, but it's buried, and the way that I would want to implement it is definitely not what they're doing, you know? And Timea can't be everywhere at every time. I can't be everywhere at every time. Shane, you can't be everywhere either. And nor is that our role, right? Like, it should be in the education system. This is a real issue that is happening. And teachers needing to be able to identify a victim of human trafficking sitting in their classroom, right? Like, no different than by law in Canada, in the United States, as a teacher, if you suspect that a child is being abused, you have a duty to report it. Well, they know the signs to look for. Why aren't we doing that with human trafficking? You know, at least we're not here in Ontario. I don't know if, you know, certain parts of the states for you guys, they're doing that, but they're certainly not doing that here.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. I think that, you know, people need to realize too that if you want to make a change as a person, politics is local, right? Your politics is local. So whether it be your city manager, your mayor, you know, your chief of police report to your mayor and city manager, talk to them. Talk to them about what you're seeing in your community and about getting things changed within your community to make human trafficking more of a topic or more of an awareness, because that's what those elected officials are in place for, is they were elected by us for us to represent us. And if we are talking with them and telling them what we feel and how we feel, then they are better equipped to go on and make those kind of things happen.
Yeah. Timea, do you have any last wants or thoughts? I know you agreed with Shane, but is there anything that you would love to see happen in the movement right now?
Honestly, I just, I'm going to go with the float and see where we go. I'm actually just trying to figure it out. What would be the next logical way to take the movement? You and I are going to have a lot of conversations, and we already had a lot of conversations about it. I'm kind of taking a seat back right now for the last few months and just watching everything that's unfolding in the States and here in Canada, because it does look like we're going backwards, and I want to find another way around that and see where we go from here. I really am starting to lean towards educating our next generation, and also educating not just the girls, but also the boys. I'm also leaning towards, like, let's look at areas that we haven't looked at yet, which is, you know, the sex buyer. We talk about it all the time, but there hasn't been an actual extensive, you know, real movement on sex buyers. So I'm just figuring it out where to go from here, especially seeing where the law enforcement is going. So if it's not going to be the enforcement side, then what is it going to be? So I'm working on it, and you and I are going to have a lot of chats in the near future, and Shane.
Mm-hmm.
I can't wait. Well, we will definitely have to do it again. Like I said, I love that this has been an impact hour for us, even though I know for some people it's happy hour, but this has been really fantastic. I appreciate you both giving your time today, and that it just worked out that we're having these powerful conversations on World Day Against Human Trafficking. So thank you guys. Shane, great to meet you. And yes, let's rendezvous again. We'll have to continue the conversation going.
Thank you so much, Shane, for having us.
Thank you, guys.